Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. We're going to talk about the comic book industry again. I think we've actually had 3 comic book videos this week, which is pretty surprising because we sort of laid off the comic book news because most of the comic book news was just bad news. It was, everything everybody already knew. The mainstream comic book industry was in decline. The sales were down. Manga has been outselling comics. Comic shops are closing. Lots of doom and gloom. There are a few bright spots, especially in the crowdfunding space, especially in the manga space, etc., etc. But for the most part, comic book news has not been that great. So we're going to talk about some really surprising news. This really surprised me. And maybe it shouldn't have. Maybe I'm completely out of touch with where comic book readers are right now. But Marvel's Spider-Man #1 was not quite the massive hit that Marvel was hoping for. This was not a slam dunk. Of course, that reboot being written and by J.J. Abrams and his son, Henry Abrams, and people have said it's actually pretty good. I haven't read it yet, but people said it was actually pretty decent. It was not as cringy as people were worried it would be, and but the surprising thing is that it wasn't #1. Spawn 300 beat Spider-Man #1, and this is sort of ironic, isn't it? Because Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man #1 from back in the 90s is still one of the top-selling comic books of all time. I don't think it beat Jim Lee's X-Men #1, but it came pretty damn close. It's a very iconic cover. And then, of course, Spawn #1 was a huge, huge seller back in the day, too. So now, Spawn 300, how fitting is it that Todd McFarlane's Spawn 300 beats yet another Spider-Man reboot from Marvel with Hollywood attached to it? I think that's kind of funny. I think it's kind of funny. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, kind of what's going on at Marvel right now. And then we're going to talk about manga sales again, because I'm telling you, this is where the kids today are listening to that rock and roll music. They're going to manga. They're migrating from traditional comics to manga and graphic novels, and that is my take on it. So anyway, before we get started, please subscribe to Clownfish TV if you haven't done so already. I think we hit 68-ish thousand subs. We're hoping for 100,000 soon, so we can keep bringing you guys content, keep bringing you guys our hot takes on pop culture, occasional rants, etc., etc. And subbing helps us get found in the algorithm, because Google and YouTube, they want the mainstream media, they want Hollywood to outrank independent creators now, it seems. And every time there's an algorithm change, it hurts indie creators. So any YouTube channels, whether it's ours or other YouTube channels, make sure that you give them a sub to support them, whoever it is that you like on YouTube. So here we go. ICV2, this is sort of the industry standard publication for the comic book and gaming industries. Spawn #300 was the top comic in September. Image Comics Spawn 300, the landmark issue that matched the previous longest run for a creator-owned comic, Cerebus, was the #1 comic in September, fueled by a large number of variant covers. There's that, yeah. And a lot of promotion, according to information released by Diamond Comics. It topped Marvel's Spider-Man #1, penned by J.J. Abrams and Henry Abrams, and the X-Men titles, House of X and Powers of X. I mean, just think about that. This is the best Marvel's done in a long time. The X-Men books and Spider-Man. This is the best they've done in a long time. And Spawn 300, created by a former Marvel Spider-Man artist and writer, beat them like 25 years after the fact. I think it's hilarious. The $7.99 retail price meant that Spawn 300 had the top dollar spot as well as the top unit rank. So here's by top 10 comics by dollars. Spawn 300 sits on top. Spider-Man #1 embarrassingly came in second. And I'm going to tell you why this is embarrassing for Marvel. It's embarrassing for Marvel because this book, I think, was supposed to be their Hail Mary pass. This was supposed to be the million comic seller, I think. I'm not sure if CB Cebulski had clarified his statements or not. As I understand it, the Spider-Man reboot done by a Hollywood guy was supposed to be this massive, massive hit, and it was beaten by Spawn 300. And look at these numbers. You look at all the comics on the top 10 list, and they're all... Doomsday Clock is barely out of the single digits. It's because it's all reboots. The comic book industry lives and dies by reboots, but then you have Spawn 300, independent comic, by a former Marvel creator who had a lot of issues with the comic book industry 25 years ago. and he beat all of this. I think it says so much. That says so much. They said that this month was actually pretty good for comic shops, with comics and graphic novel sales to comic stores up 4% versus the year ago period. That's with a lot fewer shops. That was all in floppies, which were up 10%, while graphic novels continue their long slide with an 11% decline. That is in the direct market. I want to be very, very clear. That's in the direct market. Outside of the direct market, graphic novels and manga are actually doing pretty well. But we're not talking about comic shops here. Year-to-date numbers are now positive, up 0.25% from the first 9 months of 2018. There's a lot of reboots on a lot of big event books. You know, once you drop out of that top 10, it's all kind of downhill. So to be fair, but I think this is really, really interesting, and good on Todd McFarlane. Good on Todd McFarlane. He's definitely getting the last laugh here, and he continues to laugh at Marvel. And he's right. These guys were right. The early Image guys were absolutely right. So why is this embarrassing for Marvel? Cebulski, editor Cebulski, said earlier in the year that the last comic to sell 1 million copies was Star Wars 1, which was almost 5 years ago. I feel it's about time we publish another title that sells over 7 figures, and I think I have an idea. Now, I don't know if they're talking about a Star Wars reboot. I'm not exactly sure. And Star Wars #1 only sold that many copies because of Loot Crate. They point this out in Bleeding Cool, and I agree with them 100%. They basically gave people Star Wars #1. And this happened with a lot of the top-selling, quote-unquote, top-selling comic books of the last couple of years, but Loot Crate went out of business. Loot Crate's gone. Filed for bankruptcy is history. So, you know, how are they going to sell 1 million comics without Loot Crate? I don't think they're going to be able to. But I think what he might have been talking about was Spider-Man #1, which they made a huge deal about. They made a huge deal about Spider-Man #1. This was going to be the biggest thing ever at Marvel. It was a Spider-Man comic written by Hollywood guys. And yeah, here comes the media. Why did Marvel drop the ball with J.J. Abrams' Spider-Man comic? Ouch. Ouch. That's a good question. How could Marvel lose to Spawn 300? Most casual comic book readers, I think they forgot that Spawn was still being published. Like, you don't really hear much about Spawn anymore. Spawn was very, very big in the 90s, and it had kind of resurgence of interest, you know, when they had the HBO series, and of course, you know, the McFarlane action figures. You know, Spawn was a huge deal, and then Spawn kind of just faded a little bit. I mean, it always sold fairly well for an indie book, but it wasn't the huge hit it was 25 years ago. And then all of a sudden, here comes Spawn 300, and it kicks the shit out of Spider-Man. Oh my God, that's hilarious. Spider-Man, written by Hollywood people, gets the shit kicked out of it by Spawn. So this is funny. This has come from Sci-Fi Wire. In a perpetually struggling industry like comics. No, comics are up a little bit, like 0.25%. Comics aren't struggling. It's all fine here. Everything's good. In a perpetually struggling industry like comics, there's always interest in doing something, anything to goose sales, whether it's a new creative team taking over an existing title or yet another accursed event. Marvel and DC are always open to ideas to bring attention to books. They always go to Hollywood. Okay, so we're going to skip the spoilers. And we're going to get down to this right here. And this is what I'm talking about. Reaction to the series has been excellent. I've heard actually people say it was pretty decent. It was surprisingly decent. At least in regard to sales. It debuted as a top 5 comic in September, and pre-orders for the second issue indicate similar interest, which is why I'm surprised we aren't hearing more about it. You're not hearing more about it because the sales weren't what they were expecting. This should be a really big deal. Yes, it should. The director of Star Trek, Mission Impossible 3, Star Wars The Force Awakens, and The Rise of Skywalker, co-scripting a big twist Spidey story with his son. Marvel's own editor-in-chief, Cebulski, was teasing this quite a bit back in June. So this is what he was talking about. We're gonna sell 1 million copies. It's gonna be huge. But then Loot Crate goes out of business like a month later or something like that, you know? So, whoopsie. Aside from the pre-release grumblings that Henry Abrams hadn't earned a chance to write Marvel's flagship hero, in one interview with EW, the buzz from this limited series has been rather quiet since the people have actually had a chance to read it. What gives? I don't think anybody gives a shit. This is what I think is going on. Certainly the fact that Abrams is one of Hollywood's biggest and busiest filmmakers limited his ability to promote the comic. Hopefully, J.J. Abrams was spending time on the episode 9 script and directing episode 9 to make sure it's not complete trash like The Last Jedi, and not spending all of his time writing a fanfic with his son. That's what I'm hoping was going on. So even if the Spider-Man comic is kind of meh, maybe Rise of Skywalker will be decent. I don't know. The book debuted just after Abrams had signed his name to a $500 million deal to move his Bad Robot Productions to Warner. He has a certain galactically anticipated movie due out in 2 months. There's no doubt occupying much of his time. We get it. JJ is busy. That doesn't explain why Marvel didn't climb up to the proverbial rooftops to shout this out. Is it just me, or has the marketing of what should have been an event series been strangely subdued? Even if there's concern about story-specific spoilers, a valid concern, the chance to draft on Abrams' star power to possibly get casual readers to pick up a Spider-Man comic should override fears of spoilers. Add in the component of Abrams and his son teaming up to do a story that has a strong father-son theme, and you have a lot to work with. It's a really big deal, Marvel. Treat it as such. Yeah, I think I can tell you kind of what might have happened here. Kevin Feige, upheaval at Marvel. Here's the thing. By the time the public hears about major changes, why do we have a commercial for this? By the time the public hears about major changes at a company like Marvel or Disney or whatever, that decision was already made, and it was already made like months ago or weeks ago. I think what happened was the Feige factor. I think with Marvel and upheaval, I'm sure there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on at Marvel now, which is why Kevin Feige is put in charge of everything. Okay, I think Marvel was a little preoccupied. I think they greenlit this thing, they did it, and I think too there might actually be some weird corporate shenanigans going on that they're not going to. Disney's not going to promote J.J. Abrams as much maybe as they would have, because J.J. Abrams is jumping ship to Warner Media. He's already doing Rise of Skywalker. They got to promote it, Star Wars, but like they're not going to go out of their way to push his comic book because he's jumping ship. He's a traitor. J.J. Abrams is a traitor. He's going to Warner Media, a direct competitor of the Walt Disney Company. But that's tinfoil mouse ears. That's part of it. The bigger part of it is I think Marvel was in absolute chaos. I think they've been in chaos for months. I think Joe Quesada knew he was getting demoted, and let's not even mince words. Joe Quesada got demoted. Kevin Feige is in charge of everything at Marvel now. And I'm going to be completely honest, because they couldn't beat, a Spider-Man #1 could not beat Spawn 300. Disney's going to look at this and go like, WTF. You know, how can we have a Spider-Man #1 by J.J. Abrams and not even beat Spawn 300 by some 90s Spider-Man artist? You know, this is embarrassing, guys. And they're gonna be like, why are we even doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we, you know, beating our heads against the wall doing comic books when it doesn't really freaking seem to matter? There's no real revenue to be gained. Whether it's this or crowdfunding or whatever, these indie creators are making us look bad, and it's just not worth it. And I'm telling you, Kevin Feige being brought into Marvel to be in charge of all of Marvel is not a good thing. Everybody's like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. Kevin Feige's coming in. He's going to save Marvel Comics. I don't think Kevin Feige cares about Marvel Comics. I don't think Disney put him in charge of all of Marvel to save Marvel Comics. I don't think they care. I think this is the beginning of the end for Marvel as a comic book publisher. And this kind of, the fact that they can't even beat Spawn 300 definitely is not going to help their case any. This was supposed to be a million seller, and it got, you know, pounded by Spawn 300. That's crazy. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's the comic book industry is just like, I mean, they can try to stay positive about where it's at right now, the mainstream comic book industry, but it's like, look, yeah, of course it's going to be up a little bit. You know, we're talking $7, $8 books now, you know, but we're losing comic shops. We're losing places to sell comics. Floppy comics are definitely on the decline rapidly, you know, and even these numbers are nothing compared to what they would have been, you know, 20, 25 years ago. You know, definitely nothing compared to what they would have been 30 years ago. So it is a flatlining at best industry and declining at worst. And if Marvel pulls out of publishing comics, if they stop publishing comics themselves, it's going to be a dead industry, because we're talking more than half of the market, or almost half of the market's gone. Like, boom, just gone. And then DC's talking about rebooting their comics, their comic line next year. And it sounds a lot like Marvel now, and that's not going to go over well. So I don't know. I think we're definitely in the end game of the direct market. We're definitely in the end game right now. And what's going to kill it is going to be corporate companies like Disney and Warner Brothers. Either one of them decides to pull, that's it. That's it for the direct market. So thankfully, comic book creators have a lot of options now with independent publishing, with manga. Manga and graphic novel sales are actually up. We've been talking about this. This is the future, graphic novels and manga. There's always going to be a place for floppy comics, but the kids today, this is what they're reading. Our kids, they don't read floppy comics. They read manga, they read graphic novels. That's just kind of what they've grown up on. And there definitely is a market for that. Manga sales are going through the roof. Graphic novel sales are starting to tick up again, because now, the New York Times has their bestseller list back. I think that'll probably help. But again, you can't go by ICV2's diamond numbers for graphic novels, because that's the vast majority of graphic novels are not sold through comic book shops. They're actually sold through bookstores and whatever. And so there is a future. There absolutely is a future for creators. Absolutely terrible what is probably going to happen to the comic shops. And that's a huge part of my childhood. Comic shops, arcades, malls, and I hate to see that happen. I don't want to see that happen. But if the comic shops die, it's going to be because of Diamond. It's going to be because of stupid decisions on the part of Marvel and DC. It's going to be the corporate owners of Marvel and DC deciding they don't want to play this game anymore. And it's just tragic that's how things end. This is how the comic book industry ends. But for now, I have a lot of satisfaction in seeing Spawn beat all of these Marvel and DC comics. Because Todd McFarlane, man, back in the day, he was a spitfire. He was saying a lot of things that a lot of comic book YouTubers are saying now. He definitely was ahead of the curve, and he's been successful. He's been very successful because of that. So we will see what happens. I think this will help his case to get another Spawn movie made for sure. All right, so we're going to wrap this one up. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants here on Clownfish TV. This has been Neon. We will talk later. Thinking about printing your own comic books, graphic novel, or manga? We recommend our friends over at Print Ninja. We've been using Print Ninja as long as they've been printing comics, and both the quality and price is excellent. Mention Clownfish TV and get an additional 5% overrun of your book order quantity printed for free. For free! That's free books, people. Just mention this offer on the phone or in the additional information box on the quote request form. That's printninja.com, or click on the link in the description below. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.